Okay, we are going to review some of the terms that we've learned before winter break about algebraic expressions. So while you are watching this, you do not need to take notes unless you have lost your journal or something happened to your journal, so you don't have those notes from before break. So ask yourself now, do you have your notes from before break about these vocab terms? If you do, that's awesome. Keep those, you will need them. And if you do not, you need to grab your notebook now so that you can take some notes to write down these vocab words. Let's get started. Okay, so our first vocab term is the term algebraic expression. So you can see that right down here. Whoops. Algebraic expression. So an algebraic expression is an expression that does not have an equal sign. So we have equal signs in something called an equation, but expressions do not have equal signs. They do, however, have operators, which are just our addition and subtraction signs or multiplication and division signs. We can see those up here. We have an addition sign and a subtraction sign. They also have numbers and letters. So we'll talk more about what those numbers and letters are called, but it's important for us to know that the algebraic expression does not have an equal sign, and it has numbers, letters, and operators, which are just our signs like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. So if you're writing this down, you can also write this example, 3x plus 5y minus 9. And we're going to keep moving. So if you are writing, you can pause this and then click play to move on to the next term. Okay, so variables are very important, and those are a part of algebraic expressions. Variables are letters that represent numbers that we do not know yet. So those letters do represent a number, and they can represent different numbers. So let's take a look at some of the examples in the picture here. The first one says 7 plus x equals 10. Well, if I ask myself, what plus 7 equals 10, I know that if I add 3 to 7, I will get 10. So in that case, for 7 plus x equals 10, x is going to equal 3. Let's look at the one next to it in yellow. It says 2 plus x equals 10. Well, I know that if I add 8 and 2 together, I get 10. So in this case, x equals 8. Let's look at one more. The bottom one in green says x plus 4 equals 10. Well, I have to ask myself, what can I add to 4 to get to 10? Well, I know 4 and 6 can be added together to equal 10. So in this one, x equals 6. So as you can see, this letter X does not have any one meaning. It changes in its meaning or its value depending on the whole expression or equation. So, when we first look at an expression and we see a letter like X or Y or A or B, we know that that's a variable. We know that that represents a number that we don't know yet. And we can most likely assume that we will solve to figure out what that variable does equal. So go ahead and write down the definition. If you're taking notes, you can write down some of the examples, and we are going to keep moving. Okay, so here's an example that says, what plus 2 equals 5? So I see that when I have that sentence there, or that question, what plus 2 equals 5, I can write that in an expression. So I can do x plus 2 equals 5 to help me solve for whatever x equals. So now I have to think to myself, what can I add to 2 to get to 5? Well, I know that 2 plus 3 equals 5. So in this problem, x must equal 3. Okay, so we've talked a lot about what a variable is, and we know that that's a letter that represents some number that we don't know what it is yet. Now we can talk about something called a coefficient. A coefficient is a number that is multiplied by a variable. We can identify a coefficient by seeing if there's ever a number directly next to a letter. So in this example, 6x, there's no sign there between them. There's no addition sign, there's no division sign or anything like that. It just says 6x. That 6 is actually being multiplied by the x. So when we see a number and a letter next to each other like this, we can assume that they're being multiplied by each other. The 6 is called the coefficient. So just the number that's being multiplied by the variable is called the coefficient. The letter is called the variable. So in this case, 6 is the coefficient, x is the variable. We also have something called a constant. A constant is a number that we do know, and it's one that does not change and it stands on its own. So we know that variables, we don't know what that number actually is, but a constant, we know what it is. So in this case, 3 is the constant. We know what it is because it says it's 3. It stands alone, so it's not being multiplied by anything, and it doesn't change. So if you're writing notes, please write down this definition, and you can write down an example and draw an arrow pointing to the constant. In this case, it is 3. Here's a little cartoon that says 1 plus x equals 5. The 1 is looking at the x and says, "So, who are you?" And the x is saying, "I was kind of hoping you all might know." So that's just a funny joke because we don't know the value of variables until we solve for them. So this little x doesn't know what he represents, and neither do we. If we were to solve for it and ask ourselves, what can we add to 1 to get to 5, we could figure out the value of that x. So ask yourself, what number can we add to 1 to get to 5? Well, we all know that 4 plus 1 equals 5, so in this case, that x actually equals 4. And then our final vocab word here is the word term. So a term is a single number or variable, or a number and variable that are multiplied together. So in this expression, 5x minus 3, 5x is a term because it's a number and a letter that are multiplied together. And 3 is also a term because it's a number that's by itself. If we had a letter that was by itself in here, so if this said 5x minus 3 plus b, b would also be a term because it's a letter that's by itself. So as long as it's a letter or a number or a letter and a number together, it is a term. So let's take one more look at this expression that we saw in the beginning and identify what each thing is. So we can see that the letters are labeled as variables. So both x and y here are our variables. We have two coefficients, 3 and 5. Those are coefficients because they're being multiplied by a variable. So the 3 is being multiplied by x and the 5 is being multiplied by y. 9, on the other hand, is not multiplied by a variable, so that is not a coefficient, it's a constant. It stands on its own and it doesn't change. All of those, 3x, 5y, and 9, are terms. So each part of our expression here is a term. And that is it. So finish up taking your notes, and then we are going to come back together and check our understanding around these words.